Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. ISCJ, how is everybody doing? Inshallah, I hope everyone is well. We're going to be continuing today with the series on the shoulders of giants, life lessons from the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And today, inshallah, we're covering Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the second Khalifa in our tradition. Also one of the giants and one of the Ashara Mubashirin, one of the 10 that was promised Jannah by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So let's begin, inshallah. Bismillah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لو كان نبيا من بعدي لو كان عمر, that if there was to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar radiallahu anhu. This is what the Prophet ﷺ himself said, and it tells you the stature and the maqam of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. This is a character in history, Umar, who's well documented. His khilafah is well documented. As a matter of fact, he's loved and liked by both Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Michael Hart, who wrote a book in the 1970s called The 100 Most Influential People of All Time, he puts Umar ibn Khattab as number 52 because of his justice, because of his leadership that he had shown. He puts him as number 52 in his book. So let's talk about earlier on. Umar was known in the days of Jahiliyyah as somebody who partook in all of the vices. So he was somebody that would drink. He was somebody that had idols and partook in idol worship. Unlike the Prophet ﷺ, who was obviously on the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam, so he was always monotheistic in nature. The Prophet ﷺ never gravitated towards the idols or the ways of their ancestors, the ways of the Quraysh's ancestors at the time. But Umar was somebody that partook in that, somebody that would often be he'd be with alcohol and women and all of those things. In his mid-20s, this is narrated in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, rahmatullah alayhi, that we know about his conversion, and I'll talk about that as well. But this is a narration that is not often mentioned, that Umar was out one night and he was seeking to get drunk, as was the habit of many people of his age at that time. Like I said, he was in his mid-20s, and so everywhere he went, the shops, they were closed. And so he said, okay, I want to get my mind off of this, and so let me go to the Kaaba and let me do tawaf and get my mind off of this. And so he makes his way to the Kaaba, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is over there and he is praying at the Kaaba. Now understand, there's no lights, it is dark, and so in the cloak of the night, he thinks to himself, well, now this man Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is out here, he is spreading this Islam. It is it's splitting up families, it's causing a lot of damage within our society. Let me teach him a lesson today. Let me teach him a lesson today. And so he sneaks up towards the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he hears that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's reciting from the Quran, and immediately he stops and he notices that he's reciting from Surah Al-Haqqa, Al-Haqqa, Mal-Haqqa, wa ma adraka Mal-Haqqa. And so he listens to it, and Umar starts to have this conversation inside of himself, right? And he's saying that, these are beautiful words. Is this man a poet? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you know, in verse number 30 of Surah Al-Haqqa, he says, إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ, that indeed the Quran is the word of a noble messenger. This man who's in front of you, he's a noble messenger. So Umar thinks to himself, oh, what if he is a poet? وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ. So Allah responds in Surah Al-Haqqa that this is not the word. And Allah responds in the Quran, وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Nor are these the words of a soothsayer, little are you of a person of remembrance. And it's so that the Prophet ﷺ has no clue at this time that Umar is there, that he is behind him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is communicating through the Quran, through the Prophet ﷺ, right, in these verses to Umar's thoughts. And this is narrated in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, that Umar then says, Umar narrates this himself. He says that it was at this time that the Quran and Islam entered my heart, but he did not accept it, right? But he did leave the Prophet ﷺ alone at that time, and he didn't bring any bodily or physical harm to him. It's well known that the Prophet ﷺ, he made the famous dua that he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring glory to Islam, especially when the Muslims were weak, especially in those days in Mecca when they would be tortured and ridiculed, that Islam brings glory and strength, that Allah brings strength to Islam through one of the two, either Umar or Abu Jahl. Right? These were people that were nobles in the Quraysh. They had a standing in society. They were people that others looked up to. And so he felt that if one of them were to join their ranks, that Islam would be truly strengthened. And just a few days ago, Hamza, his beloved uncle, had converted into Islam, and he was now on the side of the Prophet ﷺ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has started to fortify the Muslims. And so, as we know, the story that Umar was out, and Abu Jahl, he got all of the people of the Quraysh together, and he said that we've had it with this man Muhammad, and if anybody would take him out, I will give him 100 camels. And so Umar says, that's it. This is my chance right now, right? And so Umar goes and he starts to make his way to the Prophet ﷺ. And in those days, the Prophet ﷺ would often be at the house of Arqam, at Darul Arqam. And on the way, he stopped by Nu'aym. Nu'aym is now a new Muslim. It's not known in Mecca that he's a Muslim. And so he's trying to get in the way and obstruct Umar from going. And he said, where are you going? And he says to him that I'm going to take care of Muhammad once and for all. And he says, well, what are you doing taking care of Muhammad, that your own family has started following his ways? Why don't you go take care of them first? And by that he meant his sister Fatima and her husband. So Umar makes his way to his sister's house, and basically forces his way in. He notices that they are reciting from Surah At-Taha, right? And at this point he says, what is this that you're reading? And he goes and actually strikes his sister. And when her husband comes to protect her, he actually strikes him as well. Umar was, in terms of his physicality and his one of his physical attributes, he was very large. He was strong. One of the narrations say that when he would sit on a camel, that his feet would come very close to touching the ground. Right. This is how big of a man that he is. And you could see, he became the model, the epitome, the symbol of justice later on that we will see in his khilafah from, what I'm going to talk about today. But at this point, he was exactly the opposite. He used to embody injustice, beating a woman, his own sister, and then his brother-in-law. And so he starts to say, what is that you're reading? And he's very curious, and he actually wants to read from the Quran. And so they say that, no, you can't come near this. And they tell him, yes, so what? We follow Muhammad. Yes, we have become his followers. What are you going to do about it? Right? They've already been struck by him. At this point, they become bold and they tell him, yes, we follow him. And he says, well, give me your book. I want to read from it. And they tell him that, no, you're a pagan. You can't read from this. You need to go purify yourself first. And so Umar goes and purifies himself. He comes back and he sits there with them. And at this point, he is truly changed. He's truly changed. And he goes with his, he's still equipped with his sword. So remember, he was out to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ. And he shows up at Arqam, and the companions are there. And they ask who's at the door. They let him know that it's Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And the Prophet ﷺ says that they make a dua that and then Hamza is there as well with the Prophet ﷺ in those chambers. And so Umar comes and the Prophet ﷺ, he grabs him, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he takes a very bold and aggressive approach with Umar. And that's how you have to combat somebody that is of that stature, right? If somebody of that, that's a bully or known bully, you have to then respond with equal resistance. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he's a master, he's a genius of psychology. He grabs Umar and stands up to him and says, what do you want, Umar? That if you continue on this path, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring down torment and punishment in your life. And Umar says, Ya Rasulullah, I am here to accept you as the messenger of God. And he takes the shahada and he enters into Islam. He enters into Islam at this point. And so this is the famous story of his conversion. And at this point, Umar says that we need to go and publicly start praying at the Kaaba. And so Umar was the one that actually helped the Prophet ﷺ come out now into the public sphere and start practicing Islam in a very public way, in front of all the Quraysh. And at this time, there were about 40 Muslims. There was just about 40 Muslims in the entire of Mecca when Umar joined the ranks of the Prophet ﷺ. Tell you about some of the famous stories and episodes that come from his caliphate, from his khilafah, when he was the leader of the entire Ummah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. There's one where in Egypt, there was a Coptic Christian man who was racing with one of the sons of Amr ibn al-As, who was the governor of Egypt. And so that man beats Amr's son, and Amr's son hits him. And he says that, he hits him and he says, I do this for me and in the name of my father. And so this Coptic Christian man knew that there was a just man in Medina who governs all of these lands. And so he wrote to him, and he goes to see Umar ibn al-Khattab in Medina. And at this time, Umar is cleaning the masjid when he approaches him. He's cleaning the masjid. And so this man says that, some injustice has been done to me, and I want you to set the record straight. And Umar could have been like, listen, I don't have time for this, right? I'm governing the Muslim Ummah. I'm trying to expand the Muslim empire to the four corners of the earth. He doesn't say that. He puts down everything that he's doing, and he summons Amr and his son to come and now listen to the testimony of both. And when everything has been explained, he says, alas for him who hit you. So you get to now take your just revenge on this person, and one for his father, who happens to be the governor of Egypt, because the son did it in the name of the father. And so a lash for the father as well, right? And this speaks to the supreme justice, the true justice of Umar, a man who was known for his injustice. And when he entered Islam and the truth of Islam, that he was somebody, as we know, his name was Al-Faruq, the one who distinguishes between haqq and batil, right? The one who distinguishes between truth and falsehood. And he lived by that. He embodied that. Umar ibn al-Khattab was very famous for, during his khilafah, the night patrols, that at night, him and a few of his servants and his entourage would go out, and they would go and seek out people that were low on food, people that were going through trials with finances and things like that, and he would help them out with food. And so there's a famous story where a woman was she hears crying from a tent. And Umar was somebody that throughout his khilafah, he would be scared. He would used to make dua that I am afraid that a donkey in Iraq, which was part of his domain that he was governing as the Khalifa, he would say that a donkey in Iraq will complain against me on the day of judgment. Right? He even had that sort of concern that animals, the poor, the wealthy, the rich, the downtrodden, any person that was under his supervision would complain against him, even the animals. And so one day he hears these children crying. He asked to speak to the person in charge. It's their mother, and she says that the children are crying because we don't have any food. And he says, then what are you cooking in that pot? And she says that I just have some water in this pot. I actually don't have any food, and I keep stirring it to give them the impression that I am actually making food. And so Omar hears this, and he is so distressed, and he is, tension starts to build inside of him. He's like, how can I let this happen under my governance? And he races to the Baitul Mal. He gets, the food together, some meat and some bread and dates and some food, some provisions. He gets that together. His servant asks him, can I please carry that for you, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers? Can I please carry that for you? He says to him, will you carry my burdens on the day of judgment? Will you carry my burdens on the day of judgment? Right? And so this is the type of man Umar is. He goes and he says, what happened to the kids? And she says that they fell asleep. They got tired of hearing me cook, and eventually they got tired and they fell asleep. And so Umar goes and he actually himself cooks the food, and then he waits for the children to wake up, and then the kids eat. And then when he knows that their stomachs are full, then and only then does he leave from there. I want to talk about another episode. This was towards the end of Umar's life, where he knew that he was going to be actually, before I go there, there was in the 18th of Hijrah, the 18th year of the Hijrah, there was a famine that lasted for quite some time. And Umar used to make dua that he was afraid that the ummah would die off under his khilafah, under his watch, while this famine was happening. And so he used to go around, as I said, in the night patrols, and anytime he saw that people didn't have meat, or they didn't have butter, or they didn't have oil, he also would deprive himself and his family of meat and butter and oil and all of these staple provisions. As a matter of fact, one time his son somehow managed to get a watermelon, and he chases the son and he says, where did you get that from? How is the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers, how does the son have this watermelon when my entire ummah doesn't have this, right? And he says, we will not partake in this watermelon until my ummah has watermelon to eat from, right? And so he lived by, and he said, how can I be a shepherd if I am not struck with what my flock is struck with? How can I be a shepherd? How can I look after the people if I am not struck, and if I don't feel the pangs of hunger and the distress that my people feel? Imagine if we had a leader like that today. SubhanAllah. You cannot find people. It's almost like it's a fairy tale, right? It's so well documented that we know that it is history, that it's recorded in black and white. But imagine if we had leaders like that today, whether here in the United States or even in the Muslim world. We lack any leaders like this today. And so fast forwarding now towards the end of Umar's life, he was actually one of the people that was assassinated by a man by the name of Abu Lu'lu al-Majusi, who was a fire worshiper. This man actually approached Umar prior to his assassination, and he made some comments that implied that he was going to try to harm Umar. And he said this to Umar's face. And Umar discussed this with his companions, radiallahu anhum. And they said that, why don't you just take him out now? And he said that, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I think he is implying, but it would be unjust of me to go after his life, right, without any concrete proof or evidence. And so the scene is at Masjid al-Nabawi, and Umar is leading Salatul Fajr. And this man, he's got a double-pointed sword, a double-pointed dagger that he has been soaking in poison for 24 hours, for a whole day. And when Umar is in the prayer and he's leading all of the believers, all of the Muslims at the time, he jumps out and he stabs Umar. It's said about 3 times on the shoulder, a big gaping gash across his stomach, which would be the one that eventually took his life. And then he goes through the Jama'ah and he stabs about 13 other Sahaba who also pass away on that day. And the first thing that Umar does when he's stabbed is he wants, look at this. This is actually amazing. He grabs Abu Rahman ibn Auf and he brings him to the front. He's in the front line. He brings him to the front. Umar used to have this habit that, how we say astow and we ask the lines to be straightened out. He used to actually walk the lines and make sure that everybody was shoulder to shoulder, like, and the ranks were tight, like soldiers. And so right behind him, he grabbed Abu Rahman ibn Auf and he pulls him up to finish the prayer, That's important to him, that the Muslims finish the prayer. Who did he learn this from? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the Prophet sallallahu, as we know, in his last day when he was about to return to his Lord, the biggest concern in the mind and the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, have the people prayed? Did they pray? And we know that he said as-salah, as-salah, as-salah. He said salah 3 times. How important salah is in the life of a Muslim. And I know right now, so many of us are missing the masjid, right? And this is an opportunity that while we're home, there are other nawafil prayers that we can do to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Salatul Duha, which we talked about in a separate episode, and other nawafil prayers that you can, in your sunnah, and getting up for tahajjud. These are the extra things that we can do because we have some flexibility, especially if you're working from home right now. You can take advantage of that time that, perhaps you can work with your schedule. But this is the concern of Umar. And so his companions, they take him to his house and Umar falls unconscious. He's losing so much blood, especially from the abdomen area. And so when he finally comes to, when he wakes up, he asks, did the people pray? And as we know, Umar didn't get to finish his prayer. So he asks them over and over again, stand me up. And they said, how could we stand you up? You're not in good shape. So stand me up. And they stand him up and so that he can pray, but the pain is too much. So he finally concedes to lying down and praying in his bed. And so they give him some nabid, which is like water and dates that have been soaked in the water, and it's a red color. And he drinks that, and they see that some of it is coming out from one of his wounds by his stomach, but it's a red color, so they can't tell if it's blood or if it's the nabid. So then finally they give him milk. This is how it's stated in the narration. They give him milk, and they see that the milk is actually coming out from his stomach area, and so they knew that this was the wound that would eventually take his life. At this time, what was one of the main things that was so important to Umar was his proximity to the Prophet ﷺ. And so he asks his son, Ibn Umar, that I want you to go to Aisha and I want you to ask her that and I don't want you to say Amirul Mu'mineen. I don't want you to use my title, right? Because after today, I am not the leader of the believers. So I don't want you to use my title. Just say Umar has a request that can he be buried next to the Prophet ﷺ and his companion Abu Bakr. Right? Abu Bakr Siddiq was buried next to the Prophet ﷺ at this time. Now the original arrangement was that Aisha, radiallahu anha, our mother, would be buried next to her husband and her father. That place, it was known and it was understood that that was her place when she passes away. And so Ibn Umar goes to Hazrat Aisha. He approaches her. He asks her that my father has a request of you, and Aisha says that one of the main things that I wanted was to be buried in my own room with my husband and my father. But today I will give that to Omar. I will give that up to Omar. And when he approached Aisha, the news had already reached her that Omar his life was in a dire state, that he probably had few hours to live. And so I want you to keep that in mind, because now she makes this decision to give up her spot. And so when he returns, Ibn Umar returns to his father, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he says, what did she say? And he says, قالت ما تحب. She said that which you would love to hear, essentially, that which you love. And he says, okay, so she has agreed. Omar says something extremely profound. He says that after I pass away, right? Because right now the emotions are high, and perhaps she is saying yes only because of my state, of my current state. And so after I pass away, I want you to ask her again and see if she feels the same way. Ask her again. And if she responds yes, then go forward with burying me there. So afterwards, Aisha Raza anha, even after he passed away, that request was granted. And as we know, Omar is buried next to his two companions, his best companions, the Prophet ﷺ, and he's buried next to Hazrat Abu Bakr as-Siddiq Raza anhu in Medina. And every time Hazrat Aisha would come, this is another important thing, something that I think is a great message in terms of modesty. She said that, I would never have to wear the hijab. I would never have to cover when the Prophet ﷺ, my husband, and my father, Abu Bakr Siddiq, was there. But when Omar was buried, and he's buried in her own room, she said, every time I came to visit after he passed away, I would wear my hijab. I used to cover when I used to wear. And that's, an amazing story of how these people used to live their Islam. The modesty just carried over, even though he has passed away, and he's there. She used to still cover after that. We know, one of the stories that I had skipped over, and I'd like to share that also with you, is his conquest of Jerusalem, which is really well known and documented. When Umar came, there was no bloodshed in Jerusalem. Almost similar and almost mirroring the conquest of Mecca when the Prophet ﷺ came to Mecca afterwards. And so when when Umar came to Jerusalem, the head of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre would say that he could pray inside of the church. And Omar, out of his wisdom, right, he wanted to set a precedence so that future Muslims wouldn't come and say that Omar prayed in here, so this is a masjid. And so what he did instead is he would step outside and pray there. And today we have Masjid Omar over there in Jerusalem. And it's also in the charter of the United Nations, a quotation from Umar ibn al-Khattab. How can you enslave a man who was born free? How can you enslave a man who was born free? This is a quotation from Umar, and this is actually documented in the charter of the United Nations. This is something that we should, be very proud of. That even in the West, this is a man whose justice transcended through his proper understanding of Islam, his embodiment, and the way that he inculcated it in his life and in his leadership, and the justice that he portrayed as a leader, as a servant leader, that he is now praised both in the East and the West. And so, inshallah, let us go back to learning the biographies and the lives of these great men. We'll continue with this series, inshallah, with our next Sahabi. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Barakallahu li wa lakum wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.